Dr. Elena Vasquez adjusted her white coat as she walked through the crowded emergency room of St. Mary's Hospital in downtown Chicago. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across her tired face. She had been working double shifts for 3 weeks straight, treating gunshot wounds, overdoses, and car accident victims. To everyone around her, she was just another dedicated doctor trying to save lives in one of the city's most dangerous neighborhoods. The clock on the wall read 2:47 a.m. when the ambulance sirens wailed outside. Elena wiped her hands on a clean towel and prepared for another emergency. The paramedics rushed in with a young man, barely 18, blood soaking through his shirt. Gang violence had claimed another victim. "GSW to the abdomen," shouted the paramedic. "Vitals are dropping fast." Elena's hands moved with practiced precision, her voice calm and steady as she barked orders to the nursing staff. She had seen this scene hundreds of times before, but what the hospital staff didn't know was that Elena had seen much worse, and from a completely different perspective. As she worked to save the young man's life, her mind briefly wandered to memories she had buried deep. Memories of a different time, a different place, where she held a different kind of instrument in her hands. Not a scalpel, but a rifle. Not to save lives, but to end them with surgical precision. The surgery took 4 hours. The young man survived, and Elena finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. She walked to the hospital's rooftop, a habit she had developed over the past 2 years since moving to Chicago. The city sprawled before her, lights twinkling like distant stars. She lit a cigarette, her hands trembling slightly, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of her past. Elena Maria Vasquez was born in a small village outside Medellin, Colombia, in 1985. Her father was a country doctor who ran a small clinic, and her mother was a school teacher. They lived a peaceful life until the drug cartels began expanding their territory. When Elena was 15, everything changed. The guerrilla forces had been recruiting young people from rural areas, promising them purpose and belonging. Elena's older brother Miguel joined first, seduced by their promises of fighting for justice and equality. He was killed in a government raid 6 months later. Elena found his body herself, riddled with bullets, left as a warning to other families who might consider joining the resistance. That night, as Elena held her brother's lifeless body, something hardened inside her. The gentle, studious girl who dreamed of following her father into medicine transformed into someone else entirely. She kissed her parents goodbye at dawn and walked into the jungle to find Miguel's former commander. Commander Rafael Santos was a weathered man in his 40s, with scars that told stories of countless battles. He looked at the teenage girl standing before him with skepticism. But Elena's eyes held a determination that impressed him. She didn't want revenge, she said. She wanted justice. The training was brutal. Elena learned to move silently through dense jungle, to survive on minimal food and water, to read the wind and calculate distance and trajectory. But most importantly, she learned to shoot. Her natural steady hands, inherited from her surgeon father, made her exceptional with a rifle. Within 6 months, Elena had become one of the most feared snipers in the Colombian conflict. She could hit a target at over 800 meters, even in difficult weather conditions. Her call sign was Ghost because she could eliminate targets and disappear without anyone knowing she had been there. For 3 years, Elena operated in the mountains and jungles of Colombia. She took out corrupt government officials, cartel leaders, and anyone who threatened innocent civilians. She never missed a shot, and she never killed anyone who didn't deserve it. At least, that's what she told herself. The life of a guerrilla fighter was harsh and unforgiving. Elena slept in caves, ate whatever food they could find, and lived with the constant threat of death. She watched friends die in ambushes, saw villages burned by both sides of the conflict, and gradually began to question whether the violence would ever end. The turning point came during a mission in 2005. Elena was positioned on a hillside overlooking a small town where a cartel meeting was supposed to take place. Her target was Carlos El Serpiente Mendoza, a drug lord responsible for the deaths of dozens of innocent people. The intelligence was good. Mendoza would be in a specific building at a specific time. Elena waited for hours in the pouring rain, her rifle steady despite the difficult conditions. When Mendoza finally appeared in her scope, she was ready. But, as she prepared to pull the trigger, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Standing next to Mendoza was a young girl, no more than 8 years old. His daughter. In that moment, Elena realized she couldn't take the shot. Despite years of training, despite her reputation as a cold and efficient killer, she couldn't risk harming an innocent child. She lowered her rifle and watched Mendoza walk away. When she returned to camp and reported the mission as unsuccessful, Commander Santos was furious. He accused her of losing her nerve, of becoming soft. That night, Elena made a decision that would change her life forever. She was done with killing. Elena escaped from the guerrilla camp in the middle of the night, taking only a small backpack with basic supplies. She knew they would hunt for her, but she also knew the jungle better than anyone. She made her way to Bogotá, where she assumed a new identity with the help of sympathetic contacts. Using forged documents, Elena enrolled in medical school at the National University of Colombia. It was ironic. The hands that had once dealt death with precision now learned to preserve life. She threw herself into her studies with the same intensity she had once applied to military tactics. Medical school was challenging, but Elena's discipline and focus served her well. She excelled in surgery, her steady hands, and ability to work under pressure, making her a natural in the operating room. None of her classmates suspected that their quiet, dedicated colleague had once been one of Colombia's most effective snipers. During her final year of medical school, Elena met Dr. James Morrison, an American surgeon volunteering with Doctors Without Borders. He was impressed by her skills and offered her an opportunity to complete her residency in the United States. It was a chance to leave her past behind completely and start fresh in a new country. The immigration process was complicated, but Dr. Morrison's connections and Elena's exceptional academic record opened doors. In 2010, she arrived in Chicago to begin her residency at St. Mary's Hospital. She chose emergency medicine specifically because she wanted to save lives that others had written off as hopeless. Elena's colleagues respected her dedication and skill, but they also noticed her unusual habits. She never talked about her past, never went to social events, and seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to remain calm under pressure. During mass casualty events, when other doctors were stressed and frantic, Elena moved with the precision of someone who had seen far worse. Dr. Sarah Chun, the emergency department chief, became Elena's closest friend and mentor. She sensed there was more to Elena's story than she revealed, but she never pushed for details. Elena's work spoke for itself. She had one of the highest success rates in the department and could handle trauma cases that left other doctors shaking. Over the years, Elena tried to build a normal life. She rented a small apartment, adopted a cat named Miguel after her deceased brother, and even started dating occasionally. But the nightmares never stopped. Sometimes she would wake up in a cold sweat, her hand automatically reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. Elena also maintained certain habits from her guerrilla days that she couldn't shake. She always sat with her back to the wall in restaurants, constantly scanned her surroundings for potential threats, and kept emergency cash and false identification documents hidden in her apartment, just in case. The closest she came to exposure was during a hospital shooting in 2014. A man armed with an assault rifle entered the emergency department, demanding drugs and threatening patients and staff. While security guards and police took cover, Elena calmly approached the gunman from behind. Using skills she hadn't employed in years, she disarmed him with swift, precise movements that left everyone stunned. When questioned about her actions, Elena simply said she had taken a self-defense class. Her colleagues accepted this explanation, but Dr. Chin began to suspect that Elena's past was far more complex than she had revealed. Elena's reputation as an exceptional surgeon continued to grow. She published research papers, mentored younger doctors, and became known for taking on the most difficult cases. But, despite her success, she felt like she was living two separate lives: the respected doctor everyone saw, and the former killer that only she knew existed. The weight of her secret became heavier with each passing year. Elena began seeing a therapist, Dr. Maria Rodriguez, though she never revealed the full truth about her past. She talked about growing up in Colombia during the violence, about losing her brother, and about feeling disconnected from others. Dr. Rodriguez helped her develop coping strategies, but Elena knew she would never be completely free from her history. In quiet moments, Elena wondered if she had truly changed, or if she was simply a killer masquerading as a healer. The precision that made her an excellent surgeon was the same skill that had made her a deadly sniper. She saved lives now instead of taking them, but the fundamental capability remained unchanged. As Elena stood on the hospital rooftop that early morning in 2016, watching the sun rise over Chicago, she thought she had successfully buried her past forever. She had built a new life, established a career, and found purpose in healing rather than killing. She believed that Dr. Elena Vasquez, emergency surgeon, had completely replaced Ghost, the legendary sniper. She had no idea that her carefully constructed new identity was about to be shattered, and that the skill she had spent years trying to forget would soon be needed once again. The battle, as it turned out, wasn't over after all. 3 months after that quiet morning on the rooftop, Elena's carefully constructed world began to crumble. It started with a simple emergency call that seemed no different from thousands of others she had handled. The ambulance brought in a middle-aged man with multiple stab wounds. As Elena worked to stabilize him, she noticed something that made her blood freeze. Tattooed on the man's forearm was a distinctive symbol, a coiled serpent wrapped around a dagger. It was the mark of Los Hermanos de la Muerte, a Colombian cartel that had expanded operations into the United States. The wounded man's name was Diego Morales, according to his identification. But Elena recognized him as soon as she saw his face. He was Antonio El Cuchillo Rivera, one of Carlos Mendoza's top lieutenants. The same Carlos Mendoza whose life she had spared years ago because she couldn't risk shooting his daughter. As Elena sutured Rivera's wounds, her hands remained steady, but her mind raced. What was a high-ranking cartel member doing in Chicago? And why was he using a false identity? She completed the surgery successfully, but couldn't shake the feeling that his presence in her hospital was no coincidence. Over the next few days, Elena noticed other signs that disturbed her. She spotted men in expensive suits lingering in the hospital parking lot, watching the emergency entrance. Security cameras in her neighborhood seemed to have been repositioned to monitor her apartment building. A black sedan appeared repeatedly on her route to work, maintaining just enough distance to avoid being obvious. Elena's paranoia, honed by years in the jungle, told her she was being watched. But she couldn't understand why. She had disappeared completely from her old life, assumed a new identity, and moved to a different continent. How could anyone have found her after all these years? The answer came on a rainy Thursday evening when Elena was leaving the hospital after a particularly grueling shift. As she walked to her car in the underground parking garage, a figure stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. Elena's hand automatically moved toward her purse, where she kept a small knife. Old habits died hard. "Hello, Ghost," said a familiar voice in Spanish. Elena turned to see Commander Rafael Santos, now graying and wearing an expensive business suit instead of military fatigues. He looked older, but his eyes held the same cold intelligence she remembered from the Colombian mountains. "My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez," she replied in English, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "I think you have me confused with someone else." Santos smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Don't insult my intelligence, Elena. I've been looking for you for a very long time. You disappeared without permission, abandoned your comrades, and left important work unfinished." Elena backed away slowly, calculating distances and escape routes. "That life is over. I'm a doctor now. I save lives instead of taking them." "How noble," Santos said mockingly. "But you can't escape who you really are. And I need your very special talents for one final mission." "I won't do it," Elena said firmly. "I'm done with killing." Santos pulled out a tablet computer and showed her a series of photographs. Elena's heart sank as she recognized the images. Her parents, now in their 70s, still living in the same small village where she had grown up. The photos showed them at the market, outside their house, at her father's clinic. "Beautiful people," Santos said casually. "Your father still runs that little clinic, treating poor farmers who can't afford to pay. Your mother teaches children to read. Such valuable members of their community. It would be terrible if something happened to them." Elena's hands clenched into fists. "Leave them alone. They have nothing to do with this." "That depends entirely on you," Santos replied. There's a man here in Chicago who needs to die. Someone who has been very bad for business. You eliminate him, and your parents continue their peaceful retirement. You refuse, and I'm afraid accidents happen to elderly people all the time. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her past crushing down on her like an avalanche. Who? Santos smiled triumphantly. Detective Marcus Washington. He runs a special task force that has been very effective at disrupting our operations. He's scheduled to testify before a grand jury next week about cartel activities in the Midwest. We can't allow that to happen. Elena knew Detective Washington by reputation. He was a decorated police officer who had spent years fighting gang violence and drug trafficking. He was also married with 2 young daughters. Everything Elena had once fought against as a guerrilla, corruption, violence, innocent suffering, Santos now wanted her to perpetuate. I won't kill a good man to protect your drug business, she said. Santos's expression hardened. You seem to misunderstand the situation. This isn't a request. Your parents will die if Washington testifies. That's not a threat. It's a simple fact. The only question is whether you want to control how it happens. Elena stared at the photos of her parents, her mind racing through possibilities. She could warn Detective Washington, but Santos would know and her parents would pay the price. She could try to contact Colombian authorities, but Santos had connections throughout the government. She could run, but Santos had found her once and would find her again. I need time to think, she said finally. 24 hours, Santos replied, handing her a burner phone. I'll call you tomorrow night with details about when and where. And, Elena, don't do anything stupid. I have people watching your parents, and I have people watching you. Santos disappeared into the shadows as suddenly as he had appeared, leaving Elena alone in the parking garage with the weight of an impossible choice. She sat in her car for a long time, staring at the photos of her parents and trying to find a solution that didn't exist. Elena drove home in a daze, her mind cycling through scenarios and outcomes. Every option led to someone's death, either Detective Washington or her parents, or possibly all of them if she tried to be clever. She had spent years learning to save lives, but now she was being forced back into the business of ending them. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She paced her apartment, researching everything she could find about Detective Washington and his family. He was 42 years old, a Vietnam veteran who had joined the Chicago Police Department after serving overseas. His wife Jennifer was a school principal, and their daughters Emma and Sophia were 8 and 10 years old. Elena studied Washington's routine, his security protocols, his vulnerabilities. The muscle memory of mission planning came flooding back despite her efforts to suppress it. She identified 3 possible scenarios where she could take the shot: during his morning jog, outside the courthouse where he worked, or in the parking lot of his daughter's school. But, as she planned the assassination, Elena also researched Detective Washington's work. He had devoted his career to protecting innocent people from exactly the kind of violence Santos represented. He had closed down drug operations that sold to children, arrested human traffickers, and dismantled criminal organizations that preyed on vulnerable communities. Elena realized that killing Detective Washington wouldn't just end one good man's life. It would allow Santos and his associates to continue destroying countless other lives. The children who would become addicted to drugs, the families torn apart by violence, the communities ravaged by cartel activity. Her parents' lives weighed against all of those future victims. As dawn broke over Chicago, Elena made a decision that would have been impossible for the young woman who had walked into the jungle years earlier seeking revenge. She would find a third option, even if it meant risking everything. Elena called in sick to the hospital and spent the day making preparations. She withdrew her emergency cash, gathered her false identification documents, and wrote letters to her parents and to Dr. Chen explaining as much as she could without revealing dangerous details. If her plan failed, she wanted the people she cared about to understand that she had tried to choose the right path. That evening, the burner phone rang exactly when Santos had promised. "Are you ready to be useful again?" he asked. "Yes," Elena lied. "Tell me what you need." Santos provided detailed information about Detective Washington's schedule. He would be leaving the federal courthouse at 6 p.m. the following day after a preliminary meeting about his upcoming testimony. The shot would need to be taken from a building across the street, approximately 400 meters away, an easy distance for someone with Elena's skills. There's a construction site on the 5th floor of the Franklin building, Santos explained. The workers leave at 4 p.m. You'll have the elevation and angle you need. The rifle will be waiting for you, along with everything else you require. Elena memorized every detail, her tactical training automatically processing the information despite her moral reservations. It was a well-planned operation that played to her strengths as a sniper. Santos had clearly studied her methods and designed the mission around her capabilities. What about extraction? She asked, maintaining her cover. There's a motorcycle in the building's basement garage. Take the shot, get to the bike, and follow the route I'm sending to your phone. You'll have a 90-second window before police can respond effectively. Elena hung up and stared at the information Santos had sent. It was a professional operation planned by someone who understood both her abilities and police response protocols. Santos hadn't just found her. He had been planning this for a long time. But Elena had been planning too. Instead of the assassination Santos expected, she intended to use the meeting as an opportunity to turn the tables. She would warn Detective Washington about the threat, provide him with information about Santos's operation, and help him coordinate a response that would eliminate the cartel's presence in Chicago. It was an incredibly dangerous plan that could easily result in her own death and wouldn't guarantee her parents' safety. But it was the only option that allowed her to live with herself. She had spent too many years learning to save lives to go back to taking them, regardless of the personal cost. Elena spent her final night in Chicago writing detailed notes about everything she knew regarding Santos's operation, the cartel's activities in the United States, and the locations where his associates could be found. If something happened to her, at least the information would survive to help law enforcement continue the fight. As she prepared for what might be her last day, Elena thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a village girl dreaming of becoming a doctor, to a jungle fighter seeking revenge, to a healer trying to atone for her past, and, finally, to someone willing to sacrifice everything to protect innocent lives. The next morning, Elena put on her white coat one final time and went to St. Mary's Hospital. She wanted to see her colleagues and the place where she had found purpose and redemption, knowing she might never return. Dr. Chin noticed that Elena seemed different, quieter, and more reflective than usual. "Are you all right?" she asked during a break between patients. Elena almost told her everything then. About her real identity, about the impossible choice she faced, about the plan she had developed that would probably get her killed. Instead, she simply said, "Thank you for everything you've taught me. You've been more than a mentor. You've been the friend I never thought I deserved." Dr. Chen looked concerned, but before she could ask more questions, another emergency arrived, and Elena was pulled back into the familiar rhythm of saving lives. As her shift ended, Elena took one last look around the emergency department where she had spent the happiest years of her life. Then, she walked out of St. Mary's Hospital, knowing she would never return as Dr. Elena Vasquez. The battle wasn't over, and it was time for Ghost to make one final appearance. Elena arrived at the Franklin building at 3:30 p.m., giving herself time to assess the situation before the construction workers left. She had changed from her doctor's coat into dark clothing suitable for what she needed to do. Her medical bag now contained very different tools, night vision equipment, communication devices, and other items she had acquired through old contacts who didn't ask questions. The building was exactly as Santos had described, under renovation with easy access to the upper floors. Elena made her way to the 5th floor construction site, moving silently through the empty corridors. Years of medical training had taught her to move efficiently through buildings, but her guerrilla experience told her how to do it without being detected. The sniper's nest was professionally prepared. The rifle was a high-end model with excellent optics, positioned to provide a perfect view of the courthouse steps. Ammunition, communications equipment, and escape gear were arranged exactly where Elena would expect to find them. Santos had planned this operation with military precision. Elena examined the rifle without touching it, noting that it would leave gunpowder residue on her hands and clothing when fired. She also spotted the small camera hidden among the construction materials. Santos was watching to ensure she completed the mission as ordered. Instead of preparing for the shot, Elena activated a signal jammer she had brought with her. The device would disrupt the camera feed and block cell phone communications in the immediate area. It would buy her time, but Santos would know something was wrong within minutes. Elena then sent a coded text message to a number she had memorized years ago but never used. The message was simple: Ghost needs extraction. Franklin Building. 1 hour. She could only hope the number still worked, and that old loyalties ran deep enough to overcome the years of silence. At 4:15 p.m., Elena made her most important call. She dialed the main number for the Chicago Police Department and asked to speak with Detective Washington. Detective Washington, this is Dr. Elena Vasquez from St. Mary's Hospital. I have urgent information about a threat to your life. You need to listen carefully and act immediately. There was a pause. Doctor, how did you get this number? And what kind of threat? Elena took a deep breath. There's a sniper positioned in the Franklin Building across from the courthouse. You're supposed to be assassinated when you leave work today at 6 p.m. The shooter is already in position. Who is this really? Washington asked, his voice taking on the cautious tone of an experienced cop who had heard many strange calls. My real name doesn't matter, Elena replied. What matters is that I'm the person they hired to kill you, and I'm not going to do it. But there are other people involved, and they will try to complete the mission with or without me. Elena could hear Detective Washington alerting other officers in the background. Stay on the line, Doctor. We're tracing this call and sending units to the Franklin Building. Don't, Elena said sharply. If you send uniformed officers, the people watching will know the plan has been compromised. They'll disappear and try again later when you're not expecting it. You need to handle this differently. Elena heard Washington conferring with colleagues. After a moment, he returned to the phone. What do you suggest? Evacuate the courthouse quietly. Tell your people there's a gas leak or something similar. Get yourself and your family to a safe location. Then, coordinate with federal authorities to trace the people behind this. They're part of a Colombian cartel operating in the United States. And what about you? Washington asked. If you're really positioned to take the shot, what happens when you don't? Elena looked at the rifle, then at the courthouse where Detective Washington was supposed to emerge in less than 2 hours. That's my problem to solve. She hung up and began implementing the most dangerous part of her plan. Elena positioned herself behind the rifle, but instead of aiming at the courthouse steps, she adjusted the scope to cover the building's main entrance. When Santos's backup team arrived to investigate her silence, she would be ready for them. Elena had been trained to think several moves ahead, and she knew Santos would have contingency plans. When the primary sniper, herself, failed to respond or complete the mission, he would send others to investigate. Those people would be armed, dangerous, and authorized to eliminate anyone who interfered with their operations. At 5:30 p.m., Elena's phone rang. She let it go to voicemail. Santos called again at 5:35, then 5:40. She could imagine his growing frustration and concern. By 5:45, when Elena still hadn't responded, Santos would deploy his backup plan. Elena watched through the rifle scope as 2 men in maintenance coveralls approached the Franklin Building. They moved with the confident precision of trained operatives, and she could see the outline of weapons beneath their clothing. These weren't construction workers. They were Santos's cleanup crew. The men entered the building and began making their way toward Elena's floor. She tracked their progress by the sound of their footsteps in the stairwell. They were being careful, but not silent. They expected to find either a successful sniper waiting for extraction or a dead body that needed disposal. Elena had positioned herself behind makeshift cover constructed from construction materials. When the 2 men reached the 5th floor, she called out in Spanish, "Stop where you are. Drop your weapons." The response was immediate gunfire. Elena ducked as bullets shattered concrete around her position. These men were professionals who shot first and asked questions later. They had come prepared for trouble. Elena returned fire with the sniper rifle, using it like a precision instrument rather than a battlefield weapon. Her first shot disabled one attacker's weapon arm. The second shot wounded the other man's leg, dropping him but not killing him. Elena's medical training had taught her exactly where to aim to incapacitate without causing fatal damage. "I don't want to kill you," she called out in Spanish. "But I will if you force me to. Put down your weapons, and we can all walk away from this." One of the wounded men shouted back, "Santos will hunt you forever, Ghost. You can't hide from him again." Elena moved to a different position, knowing that backup would be coming soon. "Tell Santos that Ghost died years ago. Dr. Elena Vasquez is someone different. As sirens approached in the distance, Elena heard the sound she had been hoping for, the distinctive whistle pattern she had used during guerrilla operations. Her extraction request had been received and answered. Elena gathered her equipment and moved toward the building's rear exit. She left the sniper rifle behind. It was evidence now, and the police would need it to build their case against Santos's organization. The wounded men would be captured and provide additional information about cartel operations. As Elena reached the building's back alley, a familiar figure emerged from the shadows. Carlos Mendoza, the same man whose life she had spared years ago because she couldn't risk shooting his daughter, stood waiting with an escape motorcycle. "Hello, Ghost," he said quietly. "I got your message." Elena stared at him in shock. "Carlos, what are you doing here? And why would you help me?" Carlos handed her a helmet and motioned toward the motorcycle. "We can talk later. Right now, we need to leave before Santos's people surround the building." Elena hesitated. Carlos was a cartel leader, someone she should consider an enemy. But he was also offering her only chance of escape. Police sirens were getting closer, and she could hear Santos's remaining operatives coordinating their search of the building. "Why?" she asked as she climbed onto the motorcycle behind Carlos. "Because you saved my daughter's life," he replied, starting the engine. 8 years ago, you had a clear shot at me, but you chose not to take it because she was standing next to me. That decision changed everything for me." As they rode through Chicago's streets, Carlos explained how Elena's choice that day had affected him. Seeing his own mortality reflected in a sniper's scope, knowing that only his daughter's presence had saved his life, had forced him to reconsider his priorities. Carlos had gradually withdrawn from active cartel operations, focusing instead on legitimate business ventures. He still maintained connections within the organization, connections that had allowed him to monitor communications and learn about Santos's plan to force Elena back into service. "I've been watching for signs that Santos was looking for you," Carlos explained as they stopped at a safe house on the outskirts of the city. "When I learned about his plan, I knew I owed you the chance to make a different choice." Elena sat in the safe house, trying to process everything that had happened. Her carefully constructed life as Dr. Vasquez was over. Santos would ensure that her real identity became known to law enforcement. But she had prevented Detective Washington's assassination and provided authorities with crucial information about cartel operations. Over the next few hours, Elena watched news reports about the attempted assassination plot. Detective Washington appeared at a press conference, announcing that federal authorities had arrested several cartel operatives and were pursuing others. He credited an anonymous tip from a concerned citizen with preventing his murder and breaking up a significant criminal operation. Carlos provided Elena with new identification documents and sufficient funds to disappear again. "Where will you go?" he asked. Elena considered her options. She could try to rebuild her medical career under a new identity, but Santos would never stop hunting for her. She could return to Colombia and try to reconnect with her parents, but that would put them in danger. Or she could choose a different path entirely. "I'm going to Central America," she decided. "Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador. There are places there where doctors are desperately needed, and where someone with my particular skills could do real good." Carlos nodded approvingly. "Fighting a different kind of war." "The only war worth fighting," Elena replied. "Against poverty, disease, and suffering." Before Elena left Chicago, she managed to get a message to Dr. Chun at St. Mary's Hospital. She couldn't explain everything, but she wanted her friend and mentor to understand that Elena Vasquez had been real, even if her past had been hidden. "The woman you knew was not a lie," the message read. "Everything I learned from you about healing and compassion was genuine. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the whole truth, but please know that working beside you were the best years of my life." Elena's final act in Chicago was to place an anonymous call to Detective Washington, providing him with detailed information about Santos's location and operations. Within days, federal authorities would arrest Santos and dismantle his organization's presence in the United States. Elena's parents would be safe, at least from that particular threat. 6 months later, Dr. Elena Vasquez, now using her third identity, was running a medical clinic in rural Guatemala. She treated farmers, children, and anyone else who needed help, often for no payment beyond gratitude. Her past as both a sniper and A doctor had prepared her for the challenges of providing healthcare in difficult conditions. Elena still carried the weight of her history, but she had found peace in using all of her skills, tactical knowledge, medical training, and hard-won wisdom to protect and heal rather than harm. She knew Santos's associates might still be looking for her, but she also knew she was finally fighting the right battle. In quiet moments, Elena remembered the young woman who had walked into the Colombian jungle seeking revenge for her brother's death. That woman had become a killer, then a healer, and finally, someone who chose to risk everything to prevent violence rather than perpetrate it. The battle wasn't over. There would always be more Santoses, more corruption, more innocent people threatened by those who chose violence over justice. But Elena had learned that the most important battles were fought not with rifles and explosives, but with skill and compassion applied wherever they were most needed. Late at night in her small clinic, as Elena sutured wounds and treated infections under the light of a kerosene lamp, she sometimes reflected on the strange journey that had brought her there. She had been a village girl, a guerrilla fighter, a legendary sniper, an emergency room doctor, and now a rural physician serving the poorest of the poor. Each identity had been real in its own way, but Elena realized that all of them had been leading toward this moment, using every lesson she had learned, every skill she had developed, and every mistake she had survived to serve something larger than herself. The battle would never truly be over, but Elena had finally figured out which side she was meant to fight for. And for the first time in her life, she was completely at peace with who she had chosen to become.